Hey everyone, welcome to the Phase 2 Rules and Submissions event. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes, but if you are just joining, we're asking folks to maybe just drop a quick note in chat letting us know where you're joining us from. But we'll start very soon. All right, well, I think we're a few minutes in, so we will get started. Thanks again for everyone who's joining us today. So we have kind of an information dense topic today, and there's just really a lot to cover. If you are here, you have probably been participating in the Slingshot competition, maybe in phase 1, almost certainly in phase 2. And so we wanted to just do a quick reminder on the rules of this phase of the competition and how the competition is structured. We'll talk about how to submit the final submissions for this phase of the competition. As you all know, today was the rewards deadline. So, all of the deals that are sort of being considered for potential rewards in this period, all of those had to be submitted by, I think it was 1800 UTC today, earlier today. And so we're now in this period where we're asking you to submit final submissions. So we'll talk a little bit about what that entails. We have a demo of, what the process kind of looks like as you're thinking about making your final submissions. We'll talk about prizes overall, and then how specifically a little bit more on how we're going to be doing the final review and judging along with the community reviewers, the Slingshot community reviewers, how the final rewards will be determined for this phase of the competition, some pointers to think about as we look to the next month of Slingshot, or the next month or two of Slingshot, and looking ahead to 2021, some information on the competition timeline and events, support, and then ultimately, if we still have time for Q&A, we'll definitely leave time for questions at the end as well. All right, so as a reminder, Slingshot is a community competition for storage clients and developers that rewards the storage of real, valuable, and usable data onto the Filecoin mainnet. This, we're no longer in the Space Race network in the testnet, so we're storing data on the real Filecoin mainnet. This slide is a little bit outdated, but the same principle that it's been true since the beginning of the competition is still true today. The more real, valuable, and usable data that you onboard onto the network, the more Filecoin rewards you are eligible for. So we've structured this competition in a couple of phases, and the first phase of the competition started in late September, I believe, and over the course of that first month, we saw more than 730 tebibytes of data onboarded onto the network. It was really amazing. There were, more than 100 teams that had participated from, I think I don't remember the exact number, I think it was around 20 countries from around the world, and all of these data sets also had UIs and applications associated with them. So it's just a really, really awesome kind of blockbuster start to this program. Phase 1 ended on October 28th, and ever since then, we've been in phase 2 of the competition. The first month kind of phase 2 just ended today, and this competition is ongoing though, and it will be ongoing for the next several months. So a brief reminder on some of the competition rules. Again, because we've already gone through the first month of this competition, many of you may already be familiar with this, but just to remind you, because this is kind of important to keep in mind, as it will factor into the way that we do final judging for phase 2. So the first thing to keep in mind is we emphasize this a lot early on, but your project needs to be storing a curated data set to Filecoin. There's a list on the Slingshot GitHub repo that includes a number of data sets that, either we seeded, like this list of some of the data sets that we find really cool, really inspiring, and are totally publicly available. But over the last few weeks, we've also gotten a number of nominations from Slingshot participants like yourselves to add other data sets to this list as well. So if you haven't already done this, but are considering participating in the next month of phase 2, definitely feel free to submit an issue to the Slingshot GitHub repo so that we can add the data set that you'd like to be storing to this list as well. Another rule that we introduced in this phase of the competition was the distribution of your data and how you were going to be storing it with multiple miners. So in phase 1 of the competition, this wasn't really a rule that we had. In phase 2 of the competition, we basically introduced this idea that your data needs to be stored by multiple miners. And in fact, no more than 30% of your total data that you are storing for Slingshot can be stored with any individual miner. In practice, this means that your data had to be stored with like more than 4 miners, and also that the proportion of the total data that you were storing on the network had to be less than 30% for each one of the miners that you were making deals with. Another important rule for this phase of the competition was that the data that you were storing on the network had to be stored with miners that were not you, either your own miner that you maybe maintained on the Filecoin network, or affiliates of yours that are essentially all part of the same mining entity. Any of that was sort of like grounds for disqualification for this phase. And another thing to note here as well was that we were allowing competitors or participants to store up to 10 replicas of the same piece of data on the network. And any copy that was more than 10 copies of a particular file would not be counted for rewards. And so we've adjusted kind of the leaderboard calculations in order to reflect this. Next slide, please. Okay, so another really important rule for this phase of the competition is that each piece of data that you're storing to the network must be retrievable by literally anyone in the world. That's part of the reason why, on the Slingshot website now, when you click on a particular project, you can go to the project page. And there's a tab that has the deals that are being associated with a particular project. We're asking everyone in the competition to submit CSV uploads that contain the names of the files that they've uploaded and so on. And really the idea behind that is that we want you're all doing this like incredible work of storing this really valuable data to the network. And we now want other people in the ecosystem, and maybe even yourselves, to be able to use that data and build really awesome applications and UIs and Explorer interfaces for those data sets. And in order for people to be able to do that, they need to be able to retrieve your data. And so that was like kind of a key piece of this competition, was making sure that you were storing your data in a way such that it could be retrieved by others, and then also like submitting the additional information needed to make it easy for other people in the community to interact with the data that you have stored. And then the last, I believe we have one more slide of rules, but another thing that, can you go back to the previous slide, Jason? So another component here is we're also asking folks to submit documentation for how they processed and stored data to the Filecoin network, as well as how anyone who wants to be retrieving this data set can retrieve it off of the network as well. And there's some specific components here that need to be included in your final documentation submission. And as I mentioned before, in order for folks to be able to retrieve the data that you've stored, they need some additional information about the particular files, so they can actually like read and interpret and use the data as well. So as part of this piece of the competition, we're asking every participant to maintain a list, essentially a CSV that includes the following fields that are listed on this slide, and ultimately to upload that CSV file to the Slingshot website. The Slingshot website is doing some matching on deal ID. And so as long as you have this information properly structured, that it should be pretty easy to just view that kind of being uploaded onto the Slingshot website. And that will satisfy this requirement for participation in the competition. But just make sure that, for every deal that your address has made on the Filecoin network, you have this information, especially if you want it to count for Slingshot rewards. Any deals that don't have this information associated with them will not be counted for final Slingshot rewards. Awesome. So as I mentioned before, phase 2 is going to continue for the next several months. Currently, I believe through the Slingshot competition, all of you have stored about almost like 1.5 petabytes. I think it's 1.3, pebibytes of data on the network, and we'll be continuing this competition until we hit 10 pebibytes of data stored, or unless something else changes and we decide there's a better goal to shoot for. But as of right now, we've structured the following the 3 months of competition that are listed here, and we are in this phase. This month 1 period here. Today was the reward deadline for month 1. And we have the material submission deadline, which is this upcoming Friday, at least from Pacific time, December 11th, 2020. And the deadline is 1800 UTC on December 11th. We'll then be judging the submissions that are coming in next week with the Slingshot community review team, and then announcing the final winners and reaching out to all participants with kind of the final rewards determination around that time as well. All right, so sort of as a brief summary, what do you need to worry about over the next couple of days is just ensure that all of the data that you were storing over these last few weeks and anything that you store going forward for the purposes of Slingshot are data sets that are from the curated data set list. That's super important. Just double check that. I mean, I think you can't even register really at this point without that being the case, but just please make sure that you are indeed storing data sets from this list. Make sure that your project is registered at the Slingshot website, and all of the data. If you miss this deadline of today, no worries. Like the December 9th, 2020 at 1800 UTC. If you miss that reward deadline, no worries. As I mentioned, the competition is a long-running program, and so if you miss this particular reward window, that data will still count for the next reward window. So don't worry about that. Just keep storing the data that you'd like to store, but please make sure that you are following the Slingshot rules. Otherwise, it won't be counted for the final rewards. And by December 11th, this in 2 days roughly, make sure that you have submitted these final materials, which are the CID list and the project documentation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next few slides. Okay, so just a brief reminder, these final submissions are due December 11th at 1800 UTC. And so what's included in these final submissions? So the first thing is this, the deal uploads, the list that contain all this additional information about the deals that you made that were activated, that are live now on the Filecoin network, and that ultimately are counting for your Slingshot data storage totals. So the way that this, I'll just give you a little bit of context, like the way that this sort of works on the Slingshot website is that we're looking at actual state that exists on the Filecoin blockchain and pulling all of the deals that are that have been activated on the network that are associated with your project's address. And so that information is just literally coming straight from the chain. So we've gotten a number of questions from folks who are asking questions like, oh, I made a number of storage deals. I don't see them though on the leaderboard, or I don't see my project on the leaderboard, even if you've submitted everything else correctly. And one very likely scenario might be that you have made storage deals, but those deals haven't yet been activated. And so only active deals are counting for Slingshot rewards. So just make sure that any of the deals that you made were actually activated. And if not, unfortunately, it may be too late for this round of review, but those deals, if they are activated in the next period, will be included for review in the next period of Slingshot. So you need to submit a CSV upload to your account on the Slingshot website. If you have already registered, if you've already created an account for the Slingshot competition and created a project, in the project's page itself, there will be a section that allows you, this is in the deals section. There will be the ability for you to upload a CSV file that contains more specific information about the deals that you have made associated with a particular project. So a project may have many addresses, and so it'll basically be able to associate all of the deals that were made for a particular project using kind of the addresses that were associated with that project and the deal IDs that were associated with the addresses that were associated with that project as well. And so for each deal, you need to submit this information. So the deal ID, which is just an integer, the miner ID, the payload CID, which is different from the piece CID and also different from the deal CID. But really the payload CID is the content identifier that is used to refer to the actual chunk of data that you are storing on the network. So happy to go into this a little bit more in Q&A if this is confusing for people, but it's a very particular CID that you need to be maintaining that is like kind of difficult to get back out of the chain if you haven't stored it beforehand. So this is something that you really should be storing as, in an index as you are making deals on the network. You also need to submit the file name that's associated with this particular deal, the file format. And again, that's just so that people, when they're trying to retrieve the data off the network, they know how to interpret it and read it so that they can use it in their own applications. It's a core piece of this competition. So this is all really important. The size of the deal in bytes, ideally when it was stored, and then also which curated data set this particular deal is coming from, essentially. These specific instructions on the CSV upload are on the Slingshot website. But the important thing to remember here is that you're only going to get credit for deals that have this information submitted. So, there may be a bit of work required in going through and making sure that you have all of this information and assembling it so that it can be submitted to the website. Okay, so oops, there's a bit of a paste artifact here. But the next piece of the final submissions is the documentation. And so we briefly touched base on these rules here. The first was that all the data that you're storing to the network must be retrievable by anyone in the world. And also that in order to be eligible for rewards, you need to submit data storage and retrieval documentation. So specifically, we're basically looking to understand a little bit more about how your process. These data sets are in many cases very large. They are structured really differently. Like many of them may have directories of very small files. Many of them may contain really large files. It's just kind of every data set looks different. The use case for each data set looks different as well. And so we want to get a little bit of a peek into your thought process for how you approached storing this data on the network such that it could be used by others. And then so that's kind of on the storage documentation side. On the retrieval documentation side, you've again done all of this work to store this data on the network. We want anyone in the world, including the Protocol Labs team and the Slingshot team and others, to be able to actually retrieve this data and read it and use it. That's really valuable work, and we want to make sure it can go as far as possible in terms of adding value to this community. So the retrieval documentation, really, as you're putting this together, think about this from the perspective of like someone in the world who maybe doesn't have a huge amount of context on your use case, but wants, is excited by the data set you have stored, and they want to be able to use it for their own application. So what are some of the things that they would need to know in order to get this data back out and use it for their applications? And so this is kind of this is actually what is available on the projects page. So in your Slingshot account, in the project section, that's where you can upload your storage and retrieval documentation. So this is, it's important that the documentation is really usable and really high quality. And so we will be doing a review along with the Slingshot community reviewers of your documentation as part of the final review process. And again, so this information about what the documentation must include is on the Slingshot website as well, but we briefly touch on it just now as well. Awesome. So that's kind of like the description of rules, how we're thinking about the final submissions. And I'll pass it over to Dinesh, who's going to talk a little bit about how to actually go through registration and just all the steps of like actually participating in the competition as well as a demo.
Perfect. Thanks, Pooja. Let me just go ahead and share my screen here. Perfect. And like Pooja said, you've done a lot of the work already for the first part of phase 2. We want to make sure you get credit for the work you've done and register properly so that those deals and data sets are counted and available. So as many of you know, we actually have improved our registration process. You can log in through your GitHub account and set up your profile accordingly. So I've already done that here. I was streaming a little bit last night, so I'm going to correct my location back to the United States. You can add additional team members as well, and make sure you comply with the rules and so forth. So you can submit multiple projects on the projects tab. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new project for this purpose. This is going to be the Slingshot taxi example. I'm going to go ahead and update, add a logo here. And the project that I'm going to demo here is the data set from the New York taxi, the TLC ride information for the city of New York. And so I'll go ahead and add the description there, go ahead and add the Filecoin Slack handle, and I'm going to choose the New York City trip record data. Again, you can choose more than one curated data set. You can have multiple team members as a Slack, as part of your Slack handles. Again, wanted to make sure it's very clear to the judges as well as other people who may be reusing your data set in that direction. We also have a section down at the bottom, like Pooja mentioned, around how did you store your data and how did you retrieve your data? So we actually have an editor directly in the submission tool here. We can go ahead, I'm just going to copy some information from that I had prepared beforehand here. And again, this is actually for others who want to reuse the data that you've stored in the Filecoin network. So let's go ahead and format it a little bit nicer. Again, quality is important. We want to get maximum reusability for the data set and all the hard work that you've done here. So invest a little bit of time to make it readable, structured, and easy to digest using the built-in tools here. And I'm also and in this particular example, we're storing data from the New York City Taxi Department, and I'm going to actually go ahead and display the data structure and the directory structure of how I'm storing data into Filecoin. So for each year, we actually have information broken up by months. We've got different taxi types and in CSV format. I'm actually mentioning that we're actually using a standard tar and gzip structure. Types are indicated below, and we have links at the very top in terms of the data source, where it's from, the user guide for this data, and so forth and so on. And so, and then from a retrieval perspective, not only do we want to actually and understand how the data is broken up, but we actually also want to provide information so other users can actually retrieve this information as well. So let me go ahead and add some retrieval documentation here as well. I'm going to structure this a little bit cleaner so that folks can find it easy to use, add a little bit of formatting, and create this project. If you don't have the documentation, if you registered before the documentation was ready, perfectly acceptable. Go ahead, after you can create the project without this documentation and go ahead and update that as well. So there's an update project link at the bottom if you need to update your documentation or update any other information as part of your project. The next thing we want to do is actually add our addresses to make sure that the information or the deals that we provided are included in this particular project and you get appropriate credit for that. So the ability to add I'm in the wrong project. Let me go back to the other project here. Yeah, so I've got two projects here. I have some wallet addresses for the first project. I'm going to go ahead and add an address for the second project. In order to submit an address, we ask for two things. We ask for the particular address itself, as well as a signature based on the message provided here. So it's relatively straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and paste my address and signature as well. And it'll instantly verify it, assuming the signature is correct, based on the address that you provided. So relatively straightforward. And then the last step we want to do is, again, before the deadline on submissions, we want to provide a CSV, as Pooja mentioned, for all the deals as part of this project. So in this case, I have two products. I have a test product that I did earlier. I have the Slingshot taxi example project. I'm going to go ahead and upload the Slingshot taxi example. I'm going to select a file. You can also upload multiple files as well. If you have it broken down in multiple periods, you feel free to upload files, multiple files as part of the submission process. Let me go ahead and get my CSV example. Oops. So I do have some errors in my deal CSV here. Let me go back and show you an example from the other project. So I'm going to use the product that I worked on earlier here for the deal section. And so you should, and so like we mentioned earlier, we're validating the CSV headers are correct, the deals are matched, and verifying that the addresses are corresponding to that deal. So I may have an issue with the address and the deal corresponding to in the product that I just did, but this is what a successful result looks like for deals that are submitted for a particular project. And at that, I'll go ahead and hand that back over to Pooja.
Awesome. Thanks, Anish. Great demo. Let's see. So I think with that, hopefully that gives you a better sense of kind of how the flow works and where some of the pieces are for you to submit your final submissions. We can go to the next slide. So in this period, we have two categories of prizes, and it's very similar to Slingshot Phase 1. So in this period, there will be a set of storage rewards that are distributed to participants. And just wanted to say, of course, like we're having this conversation because awesome job on unlocking yet another milestone in this period. And so, because we crossed the 1 PB threshold, another 50,000 reward pool has been unlocked. And that's what we will be distributing in this next period. And in addition to that, we also have a set of booster rewards. So if, and this is essentially like a just thank you for participating in this competition and doing this great work to store valuable data to the network. So if you follow the rules, the Slingshot rules, and you store more than 50 GB of new data in this reward window, which again is from October 28th through December 9th, you'll receive a 10 Filecoin booster prize. It's kind of just a little bit of a bonus on top of whatever other storage rewards that you will be receiving. Okay, could you, I think we maybe skipped one. Could you go back slide? Okay, so There are a few different components to the final review and judging process. The first is documentation. So the community review team will be doing a review of the documentation that you submit. And there are a few different categories that folks will generally be looking for. So the first of these is comprehensibility. Basically what this means to us is just, does the documentation make sense? Is it readable? Is it generally like a reasonable process and approach that was sort of taken? It should be something that seems like generally aligned with the spirit of the competition, what we're all here to do. So there's kind of just like a basic binary, was this check for like the comprehensibility of the actual documentation that's submitted. There will be another component as well that is taking a look at the thoughtfulness that is that each project took in its architecture and how you may have approached the actual pre-processing of data and actual storage process and so on, as well as the actual documentation itself. This is an open source community. This sort of documentation is extremely valuable. It gives people in the community lots of examples of how they might approach processing interesting data sets that have different characteristics themselves. And so this is something that's just like really valuable for the community. And we want to definitely recognize teams that have been really particularly thoughtful in how they're structuring their participation in this competition. The third area here is accuracy. So the process that's sort of described for both storage and retrieval, is that like technically, I think accuracy is maybe not the best term here, but essentially, is it technically sensible? Does it make sense given what we know about how the Filecoin network and surrounding tools actually work today? And then furthermore, do the docs do a good job actually representing that process? The fourth category is the usefulness of this documentation for others, and the community review team will sort of be reviewing this as actual users of the documentation. We'll actually be using it ourselves to kind of retrieve some of this data back off of the network, try to use some of the tools that are listed in the documentation and see like, does this documentation actually work? And so there's kind of this like usefulness component. And related to that as well, what I just mentioned are these ideas of reproducibility and retrievability. So if someone were to take the steps you took to store this curated data set to the Filecoin network, would that work if they were to just follow your documentation for storage? And then on the retrieval side, can anyone in the world use your documentation and the other information that's available on the Slingshot website to retrieve the data that you've stored, read it, interpret it, and ultimately use it for their own applications? The second component of judging will include doing a review of your storage deals. So we'll be looking through the deals that you have made on the network and some of the information that you've provided about those deals, and ultimately use that in conjunction with your documentation to retrieve some of these files at random, and basically be doing a general like spot check of certain things and just understanding a little bit more about the connection between what we're actually experiencing from a retrieval perspective and what your documentation says. And again, just remembering that the spirit of this competition is we want this data to be retrieved. That's kind of like a critical requirement. As a participant, it's ultimately your responsibility to make sure that the data that you've stored can be retrieved back out of the network. Even though, miners are the ones serving the data back, participants in this competition are rewarded for storing data in a retrievable way. So that's something that's like really important. So we're going to try to retrieve the data. If it can't be retrieved for whatever reason, that's not great. So, that's like one thing we'll sort of be keeping track of. If the data cannot actually be interpreted and sort of read and used according to what you've mentioned in your documentation, that's also something that makes the data not usable by others in the ecosystem. So that's also something that can potentially reduce your final rewards. And then of course, like if the data that is retrieved doesn't match the curated data set, that's kind of like a violation of the Slingshot rule. So that's also a spot check that we'll kind of be doing for the deals. And the ideal case, which we hope everyone will fall into, is ultimately the data that you have stored can be retrieved, it can be interpreted and read, and it matches the curated data set that you are storing. And in that case, like everything is good. So basically, if you are following the rules, you shouldn't have to worry about this at all. And everything will be great and all rainbows. Okay, and then the last kind of just general review here will be to just like spot check a number of different things to make sure that all participants are following the rules. And so, there were a couple of rules that I mentioned before about like being, storing data with your own miner, making sure that you're not storing more than 10 copies of the particular data and other things like that. So we'll generally be reviewing for this as well. It's kind of hard to enumerate every single thing that that we'll sort of just be checking for. But again, if you're following the rules, you don't need to worry about this. Just make sure that you make your final submissions by the deadline, and everything should be great. Awesome. So to determine the final rewards in this period, the way that we're thinking about doing this, so we'll be starting with the proportional, just as kind of with phase one, right? So there's for this period, there's a 50,000 Filecoin prize pool, and we'll start by looking at, kind of what each team deserves based on their proportional amount of data that they stored as a proportion of the total amount of data that was stored in this particular period. And then there are a number of things that can adjust that number, that amount of like rewards up or down. So the first thing is, we'll be counting data for only the deals that have a matching, have matching information in the CSV upload. So if you don't have like the file name for a particular deal or things like that, that's not going to be counted for that particular deal, won't count for your final rewards. Also, if the documentation is off in any way, that can also reduce the final reward amounts. If the deals are unretrievable or there's some like issue there, that can also reduce the final amounts. For teams that are sort of like, violating the rules, you won't be eligible for rewards in this period, which kind of makes sense, I think. And then for teams that are just have done really outstanding work in this period, we would love to boost rewards as well. So like this is kind of discretionary, just based on like if people just have really amazing documentation, or we've seen people really helping each other out in the community, things like that, that can also like flex the rewards upwards too. So these are some of like the various factors that we'll be considering in determining the final rewards. And all of that will be ultimately decided by at some point at the end of next week. And you should expect to see some communications about that end of next week or like very early in January 2021. All right, and so because this competition is kind of an interesting structure, so we have finished month one of like Slingshot now for like this next phase, and we're just rolling ahead. So I just wanted to give some brief pointers because we're already kind of in like the next reward window for this competition. We will be resetting the counter for month two very shortly, just so that you can start to see like what your totals are looking like as you're storing data for this next period. And so that's something to look forward to, I think. In addition, I just wanted to highlight a couple of changes that will likely be coming soon to Slingshot. One thing that you should already start thinking about for the month two rewards is that we're basically looking for all participants to maintain their data on the network for at least a year. So I think previously there wasn't a requirement that the data sort of needs to be stored for like the full duration of a deal or like what that duration needed to be. We're realizing now that like this is something that these data sets are extremely valuable. Ideally, we'd want to store them on the network forever, but it's hard to do that with Filecoin today, given that deals have a maximum lifetime of 540 days. But anyways, we'd love for, it's now kind of a rule that all data that is being stored on the network must have like a 1 year minimum deal duration. And also please make sure to choose good miners. I know there are a lot of questions about this, so definitely happy to talk about that in the Q&A, like how to approach this, but choose good miners who will work with you in storing data for like the full duration of the deal. And then another thing I wanted to mention briefly as well, we'll have way more information about this in 2021, but we're going to introduce a hack track to this competition, which is essentially a long-running hackathon. Many of you may be familiar with HackFS or other hackathons that have existed in the Filecoin ecosystem. And so we're super excited about this, but this is why we're placing such an emphasis on the reusability and retrievability of the data that you're storing, because we would love to be able to host hackathons around these like incredibly valuable data sets for the world and have people be able to build on the data that has already been stored. So that's something to, I think, also to look forward to in 2021, and we'll have a lot more information about that in January. And then the last note is that you should, I think many folks are already sort of tracking this, but the Filecoin Plus program, which is the verified client program for the Filecoin network, is currently in beta. And I think that's something, especially as we think about, how do you think about choosing good miners and making storage deals that will last on the network? This is something I think that everyone in this competition should be considering looking into. And there's, it's in beta. There's like still a process that's kind of being worked out for this particular program, but especially in 2021, this is something that I think will be in full swing and Slingshot participants can take advantage of. All right, over to Jason.
Awesome. Thank you, Pooja. And I'm going to be talking about the competition timeline and structure. And this has been talked about already before, but I'll be focusing more on the events. So similar to the competition, we're going to be running a general monthly structure for events. I do ask that you use the Slingshot website to make sure you have all the update information on dates, times, and registration links. But for the most part, this is what it will look like. We want to have 4 office hours a month. So we'll do 2 Lotus and 2 Textile. And both of these are a really good opportunity to come in and actually talk to someone, answer your questions live. And for Textile, we bring in the CEO, Andrew Hill, and he's there to answer your questions. And Lotus, we bring in people from the Lotus or Filecoin team. So again, really good opportunity to actually speak to someone live and have your questions answered there. So we're also going to be doing 1 masterclass a month. So those are more focused on one topic, typically from common questions that the community is asking or common issues that are happening. So we'll bring someone in to do like a live demonstration or a live question and answer around those topics. So again, a great opportunity to interact with the community and actually talk to someone live about some of the issues or questions that you have. Next, we have judging. Pooja has touched on that. We usually hold judging at the end of the month. And then with that, we also do a project show and tell. And now we have done a few of these before. Again, it's just a great way to kind of finish off the month, recap what's happened in Slingshot. And we also like to show off some of the projects that people are working on and who's behind them and who's working on them. So those have been pretty cool and a great way to get involved. So again, these are all events, or these are all listed on slingshot.filecoin.io/events, and there you can find all the information that you need to join in on these. Back to you. Okay, support. So the events are a great way to get support if you're able to attend them, but unfortunately with time zones and other things, it's hard to attend them. So we do have different channels for you to ask questions and get support. So Slack is our main one. And we do have different channels for specific use cases or the stack that you're working on. And we do encourage you to ask the questions in the correct channels, and you'll just generally be able to get your question answered faster. So first we have the Slingshot channel, which is focused on the Slingshot competition. So if you have questions around registration or judging, rewards, anything like that, we're happy to help you in the Slingshot channel. If you have specific technical questions around Lotus or Filecoin, we ask that you use Phil Help, Phil Storage Dev, or Phil Lotus. And again, the Lotus team is there, the Filecoin team is there as well, and always available to answer your questions. And if your project is using Textile, we have channels for that. So there's PowerGate users and Buckets users. So similar to the Lotus one, the Textile team is there in those channels and ready to answer your questions. And they're always very good with that. So lots of opportunities there and places that you can ask questions. So next we have GitHub discussions. And this is relatively new for us, but we're going to populate a lot of common questions that we're getting around Slingshot, and we're going to answer them directly in those. So another great resource for you if you feel like you may have a common question, it may already be answered there. And finally, you can always feel free to reach out to us through email. So slingshot@filecoin.io. We're always there to answer your questions or direct you to the right person. So yeah, we're here to help, and always feel free to reach out to us. And I guess to finish off here, we'll open up for Q&A.
Awesome. I think, okay, yeah. I think, Jason, maybe, do we want to just go through the questions that are in the chat here?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so I think the first one is from Alice, which basically asks, since we pack small data in a database into one, I think it may be into one deal, how do we submit the list of our successful deals? Is it in one or in small data? Alice, I don't know if you're able to add a little bit more detail to this, but just from what I'm understanding from this question, I think the question is basically all we need is to be able to know how to retrieve. So, you know, obviously, as we all know, like on the Filecoin network, we retrieve data off the network by whatever the partition was that was associated with the deal. However you chunked your data when you were making a storage deal, like we have to kind of retrieve all of the data that was associated with that particular deal. So in your CSV upload, it's fine to just submit the name of like whatever that particular chunk of data was, whether it's like a directory or something like that. But if it is a directory, or if something like this, you know, you just make sure that you indicate in the file format that it's a directory, and so that we know that we're not expecting like a single file that we should be able to open. And also please make sure that in the retrieval documentation, you're sort of, as Dinesh kind of showed one example, right? That was in the storage documentation of how the generally like the files, the deals were being constructed, like what was all of the data that was associated with a particular deal, how was the data set split into like various deals. So just make sure that in your documentation, you're including that type of information so that we can actually, like the Slingshot review team, but also just anyone in the community can actually retrieve the data and use it. Okay, so then I think there's a question here from Fei Yan, which is the booster award per address, per project, or per person? The booster award is per project. Okay, and then will the final rewards be undisclosed like last time? I think for this period, they will be undisclosed, just like phase one. We can revisit that in future periods, but for now they will be undisclosed. There's also a question about, I have big data sets, more than 32 gigabytes per file, so I had to split. But due to the low success rate of deal making, some of the pieces never made it to the Filecoin network. I plan to continue to make deals in the future phases, but I want to know if there's any penalty if a piece is missing in a particular phase. So this is an interesting question. I think as long as the data is still retrievable, I don't know, because I'm not sure if like the file, if that chunk, the 32 gig chunk, which is less than the size of the overall file, can still be used in any particular way. But if it can't be, then it kind of means that like the data that you're storing to the network is not really usable by others. So this may be something, it's a little hard to say exactly, kind of like depends, I think, case by case, but there may not be like a particular penalty, but you're basically the data stored, it may not make sense to count it for this month of the competition. You might want to like wait until like till the next reward window when that file can be holistically retrieved from the Filecoin network and actually used. Because I think if you were to kind of submit the final submissions today, like the data is not, if the data is not usable, if like the way that the files have been chunked makes it, and if pieces are missing, like makes it so that the files aren't actually usable, that means that people can't use the data. So hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, definitely let us know if that needs more clarification. And then there's a question here about confused about the rewards tier. Does every phase count the storage amount from 0, or is it cumulative? Okay, so yeah, so good question. I think it's like not super clear right now on the website, but basically the way that this works is that we take a snapshot at each rewards deadline and look at the total amount that has been stored since the beginning of the Slingshot competition. So like back in September, right, at the beginning of phase 1. And that's what we use to determine whether a prize pool was unlocked. And then the actual contributions from participants that are used to determine how that prize pool is split between the participants, that is only reflecting the the work that was done by participants, or like the data storage and all of that was done in the particular month in question. So the prize pools are unlocked on a cumulative basis, and then the rewards are sort of determined and distributed on an incremental basis, kind of like in each reward period. Okay, and then there's a question about if offline deals are encouraged or discouraged. So I think this is a really good question. Basically, like I don't think that there's any sort of encouraging or discouraging of offline deals. It's a totally valid way to store data to the Filecoin network. And it's kind of available to most, to basically anyone, but requires some like offline coordination with the miners with whom you are storing your data. And so I think it'd be good to know a little bit more like what's the motivation behind this question. But I mean, right now, offline deals are a viable way to store data on the Filecoin network. So as long as the data is retrievable and usable by others, offline deals are okay from our perspective. Okay. So I don't know, Dinesh, if you want to jump in and take a few of these. I'm going to get a sip of water, but I think there's a question here from Alice. That,
I think where we left off was if our data cannot be retrieved, but we can offer reasons, can our data be qualified? So unfortunately, like the spirit of the competition is to load usable data for others to retrieve and use. And so, so we can't count it. However, if there are reasons, you may consider submitting it for future periods when the data is available, and keep those deals if they're not available at this stage. But we really want to reward teams that have actually provide useful data that others can start retrieving and benefit from as far as in the spirit of the competition. So Peter asks, it's been tough to make deals in the past few weeks for a number of reasons, including very high gas fees. Can you speak on the work that PL is doing on this? I know there are a bunch of related issues, tickets being worked on. So as folks are aware, Mainnet launched very recently. The network is relatively young, and the work that everybody's doing is participants in Slingshot, participants in the network is making the network better and stronger. But we do know that there are going to be a few bumps in the road, and so there's a little bit of volatility in terms of how the competition evolves in different phases. One of the reasons why we wanted to have a long-running competition is so that teams will be rewarded, and if there's a bump in the road, in the long term, those bumps are smoothed over, and teams will get rewarded for the data that they're storing in the network. If you don't get on the net, if you aren't able to make a deal today, you still have time to try it for tomorrow. There will be future reward periods, there will be future deals, and so forth. So we kind of acknowledge that that's happening. There's work that's happening to make that better. Probably a little bit early to communicate anything additional to that, but I think the efforts that you're making as a participant is really, really valuable and appreciated. And by reporting these issues, we actually are able to help make the network better. So Patrick asks, at present, I only registered relevant project information. Due to the machine, I haven't started storing it until now. this month's game is over, will this affect my next month and next year's game? I believe that the machine should be in place next month. So again, like the focus of a long-running competition is that if you're not able to meet this particular deadline, there are future deadlines. There's quite a bit of rewards still ongoing in future periods. So I think that should be fine if I understood the question correctly. So keep on storing data. Like Pooja mentioned, the second period is already underway as of a few hours ago. So there's no kind of pausing, keep going and keep documenting your information so that others can benefit and it becomes eligible for rewards when you're ready to report that in. How to find miners accepting deals. Currently, I can maybe find 5 miners out of 700. I think this is a evolving component at this stage, right? So I have seen recently in the Slingshot channel that Jason mentioned that there are miners communicating. Pooja mentioned the Filecoin Plus program as well, which actually also provides additional incentives for miners to accept deals. So I think it's a collaborative effort. If you do find something that's working, share with the community. I think others in the community have jumped in, and so others have ideas in addition to PL about where to find these miners or how they can participate in Slingshot as well. So no specific advice in that direction, but I think as Filecoin Plus gets as people apply for data cap for Filecoin Plus, I think that will start unlocking some of these things. I think as Slingshot gains a little bit of momentum, I think miners will start reaching out a little bit to Slingshot participants, and we'll try to communicate that and build a little bit of visibility on the Slingshot competition to the level that we can as well. I think those are all the questions. Are there any others that we missed, or anybody want to ask a question live?
Alrighty, well, I think that may be all the questions for now. Yeah, well, thank you so much to everyone for attending, and this session was recorded and we'll definitely post it online. So thank you so much for participating in this program and for doing all of this amazing work to make the Filecoin network great. We are available on the various channels that Jason mentioned, and so if there's anything that's kind of still on your mind after this call, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much. See you soon.